Boldwood presents The Santa Killer, written by Ross Greenwood and read by David Thorpe. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. In moments of pain, we seek revenge. Ami Ayalon. Chapter 1. Inga. Stevenage Town Centre, 4 years ago. Inga paid for the macaroons at Coconut Creation Bakery just off the High Street, took her change, thanked the lady and left the shop. She smiled as she gently placed the cakes in her carrier bag on top of the rest of her Christmas gifts. December for her partner Lucas just wouldn't be the same without macaroons. He was arriving home in a few days from his Air Force job abroad, and she couldn't wait. This year, the holiday season would be family only. No one else was needed. Inga opened her umbrella, put her head down, and hastened towards the car park as a squall of rain tried to blast her into the road. A sudden flash of lightning overhead lit up the empty street in front of her. She nipped into a closing shop front and counted the seconds. The thunder rolled overhead when she reached 12. The rain was torrential now, as though the gods were pouring it out of pails, but Inga didn't care about getting soaked. Her daughter, Amelie, was coming back from university tonight, and, wet or dry, Inga would be at the door when she arrived. Smiling, Inga put her umbrella down so she wouldn't get electrocuted, then half ran, half scuttled through the sodden streets. When she was almost at the station, where she'd parked her car, Inga had a dilemma. Even in the middle of the day, she'd usually walk the long way and avoid the scary subways, which had filled with homeless people over the last few years. Yet, if it was possible, the rain was harder now. She checked the top of her bag and noted the packaging for Lucas's macaroons was getting damp. Decision made, she sprinted through the series of underpasses and made it to the car park, where she giggled nervously with relief. She thought of the new boots in her bag, which her daughter had wanted all year. Inga had told her they cost too much, but she'd secretly spent all year putting a bit aside out of the wages from her part-time job at their local subway. Amelie was worth every penny. It was going to be the best Christmas ever, after a few lonely ones over the years. In fact, one year she'd had a punch in the face as her main present. Things have a way of working out, she thought. Her smile was wide as she popped the boot, but something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. It seemed as if a shadow had moved behind her. She didn't even have time to turn before the blow landed. 30 seconds later, her mind floated back into her body, and she just about regained consciousness. "Hey, lady," said a voice that seemed to come from someone many miles away. "Are you okay?" As always, Inga's mind was on her daughter. She managed to open one eye, even though it was like lifting a drawbridge, and saw her shopping bags were gone. 2 halves of a broken brick were on the ground next to her head, which pounded as if cannons were going off inside it. Ice-cold water from the deep puddle seeped through her coat and chilled her skin. She gasped. An involuntary keening sound escaped her lips. Blood poured from the wound on the side of her head and filled her eyes, and Inga saw no more. Chapter 2. The Santa Killer. Peterborough, present day, 3 months before Christmas. My fingers are white on the handlebars as I cycle past the river. I force myself to breathe slower because I'm just on another recce. Soon the time will come. The first message has been sent. The die is cast. It's cold enough not to seem out of place wearing a winter hat, but I've begun to sweat. The late autumn sun is dipping behind the rooftops, so most of those I pass are also decked in shades. With black jeans and a dark blue coat on, I really could be anyone. But sadly, I am no one. I pull up at the bench on the corner of Oundle Road and St Catherine's Lane, where I've often sat to study Maggie's life. She surprised me once with a different routine. It wasn't so cold then, but I was still in disguise. This time, I lean against the lamppost and pretend to check my phone. It must have been hard to appear inconspicuous before the digital age. I'd look like an idiot now, pretending to read a newspaper or a book. But who really stares at anyone nowadays as they walk down the street? We're too busy focusing on ourselves to consider what others are up to, and that suits me fine. She won't be going anywhere just yet because it's exercise class night. She'll leave the house around 6:45 and drive to the Swan Hotel Fitness Club. I know she meets Anne-Marie there, and they do their class. Maggie doesn't get back until gone 9 because they like to use the pool and sauna. The club is a glass-windowed building on 2 sides, so you can see the swimming area from the bushes. Must be nice to live so comfortably. My partner always complains about how unfair life is for us when others live so well. Anne-Marie gets home around the same time as Maggie because she only lives on Mare's Walk. I sometimes watch outside her house too. Anne-Marie has 4 kids, so I have a touch more sympathy for her. But she still has it easy. I'm afraid she's also on the list. Maggie is first, though. The situation is intolerable now. I've known for a while it's time to act. We haven't discussed specifically what I should do, but it has to be drastic. Perhaps that's why I'm reluctant. Yet I remember doing it before. Yes, there was guilt afterwards, but there was also satisfaction. My phone beeps to tell me it's 7:15, so I cross the road to get a better view of her place. She's the 5th house down. They are enormous properties with lengthy lawns and wide drives. The lucky cow has a double garage for her fancy Audi Q5 to nestle inside. This evening, she hasn't been back that long from work, and it's on the drive for when she goes to the gym. She always puts it away last thing at night. Her mother is there, of course. She has a small red Mercedes sports car. Where does she get her money? They don't deserve to enjoy all the breaks, but they do. I know little about her mother. I tried following her when she came on her bike once in the summer when I'd cycled too, but I couldn't keep up. What the hell is all that about? She's got to be late 60s. I thought about adding her name to the list, but there are too many imponderables. I think that's the right word. Besides, someone will need to care for the child. Maggie's huge front door opens. It's the kind that begs for a wreath like they have in those black and white American Christmas films. She steps out in her tight t-shirt and even tighter leggings, brunette ponytail swishing, looking the picture of health. Regal, even. Maggie has taken it up a notch of late, eating healthy, jogging, and 3 classes a week, so it's no wonder she looks so good. It's an understated look, very sexy, but kind of normal. She's one of those who exercises in full makeup. Maybe nobody knows the real her. Perhaps, like me, she is hidden. I watch her waving up at the nearest bedroom window. Her strange child is there, motionless, as she often is. And she's the problem. I'm not sure what's wrong with her, but it's something. That observing child is a weak link in my forming plot. No matter. Thoughts of wreaths have given me a brilliant idea. Maggie gets in her car and reverses off the drive. I turn and push my bike down Oundle Road towards town. She'll be going the other way and only see my back. I've cycled today. Sometimes I walk, other times I use public transport, but no more buses. Now my path is set, I don't want to appear on their safety cameras. Coming in a car is a no-no too. I understand enough about CCTV to know that's not a good idea. Although the detective shows I watch as so-called entertainment are rubbish. I bet the police rarely convict anyone unless they're standing next to the body with a dripping knife. My dad used to shout at the TV for the villains to be smart and keep their mouths shut. I miss that now. Instead, there is silence. I think of what happened. I consider what I did. The memories circle around in my head faster and faster, and a storm enters my veins. It gives me the strength to carry on, which is just as well, because I have no choice. Chapter 3. Maggie. Maggie Glover left her house, breathed a sigh of relief, got in the car and put it into drive, then reversed onto the road. Pippa was there, motionless, staring out of her bedroom window. Maggie waved, but Pippa didn't return the gesture. She rarely did. Maggie blew out another long breath. If it weren't for her fitness routine, she'd have suffered a breakdown long ago. Maggie smiled as she indicated right at the top of St. Catherine's Lane. Life had been tough ever since Pippa came into it, but they were over the worst of it now, she was sure of that. Her mum, recently single by the time Pippa arrived, had also been a godsend. Maggie had a lot to be thankful for, even though her husband's death had been so unexpected. Poor old James. It was no age. She accelerated down the slip road and raced towards the Swan Hotel turnoff. This car made her smile too. The crippling sadness that always arose when she thought of her husband had eased at some point this year. Now 6 years had passed since he died. Maggie was finally ready for a relationship. She turned the radio on and caught the start of Elton John and Dua Lipa's Cold Heart. Nodding her head, she sang along. The barrier for the Swan Hotel car park was up, so she zoomed in and went around the rear to the sports club. Maggie spotted Anne-Marie's green Nissan Duke nestling in her favourite spot. Anne-Marie got out of her car when Maggie turned her engine off, then pulled an Iron Man pose in front of Maggie's bonnet. "Gladiator ready!" shouted Maggie as she stepped from her vehicle. Anne-Marie dropped her pose. "Permission to proceed straight to the steam room, Mum." "Permission denied," replied Maggie with a stern look. "You must proceed immediately to the chamber of death and face the devil." Anne-Marie stood nearly 6 feet tall. She was originally from the Bahamas, and her skin looked sun-kissed all year round. But 6 months ago, she'd confided in Maggie at the coffee machine at work that she was pushing 15 stone. Maggie had been surprised. Even though they had worked in the same showroom for years, they had a very business-like relationship. Anne-Marie had 4 kids, and her husband did nights, so she was flat-out busy. Maggie was single and had Pippa, so she was worn down too. But Maggie's mother always gave her time for exercise, even if she found little opportunity for much else. Anne-Marie had wanted to know how she kept so trim, so Maggie had got her to join the same gym so they could do the classes together. Anne-Marie was still 14 stone, last time she'd checked, but she barely had an inch of cellulite on her. She was a strong woman. It was typical of life that Anne-Marie envied Maggie's willowy runner's figure, while Maggie would have loved to be so robust and powerful. She regularly joked with Anne-Marie that if she had shoulders and tits like hers, she'd go to work in a bikini top. Anne-Marie cringed at the mention of the devil. No, I can't face him. Lothario is too potent, forceful and dynamic. Maggie skipped past Anne-Marie towards the entrance. Maybe it won't be him tonight. I hope not. It's tricky to concentrate when he's crouching and grinning in front of me. I bet you hope he is, though. Maggie chuckled. She had to admit that he'd swiftly become her favourite instructor. He had such energy. Lothar hailed from Sweden and had started teaching the odd class at their gym near the end of the summer. He was super friendly and super fit. Anne-Marie reckoned he fancied Maggie, but Maggie wasn't so sure. He was a spandex-clad type with not a hair in sight on his head or body, and surely wouldn't be bothered with her when he could have any number of the footloose and fancy-free youngsters at the front of the class. The two women were already in their exercise gear, so they just changed their shoes and left their bags in the same locker. When they got to the room where the class was being held, they stood in the middle row. A few older ladies came and stayed at the back, although they weren't the only ones who let the odd fart slip out during some of the more difficult stretches. The instructor hadn't arrived yet. Dead on the hour, the far door opened and Lothar strode in. He always wore Ray-Ban sunglasses perched on his brow, which never seemed to move, and the snuggest pair of leggings possible. Any tighter, and the police would need to be called. "Evening, ladies," he said with a big white grin. "I am going to make you work very hard tonight. You will sweat. You will cry out. There'll be pain and pleasure. But mostly pain." Lothar turned around to face the mirrored wall behind him, closed his eyes, crouched slightly, and slowly gyrated his hips to the music that had just started to play. There were good-natured groans from everyone when Flower by Moby blared out of the speakers with the dreaded line to bring Sally up. It was the most brutal exercise song ever. Their glutes would be quivering jellies the next day. Maggie looked over at Anne-Marie as they both assumed the same position. "I reckon he doesn't even need to shower afterwards," said Maggie. Anne-Marie winked at her. "Is that because you're going to lick him clean?" Chapter 4. The Santa Killer. 3 months later, Monday the 14th of December 2020. I've checked a variety of stores' websites and they have a range of the things in stock I need, some of which are on offer. That's the result, because money is tight. I planned to buy them a while ago, but I knew I'd feel the urge to use them sooner. It's a perfect day to go secret shopping, with this cold front sitting over the city. There'll be no white Christmas this year, though. Milder weather is due to arrive on Christmas Eve. I stroll into town late afternoon. Even inside Queensgate Centre, people remain wrapped in hats and scarves. It's a big place, but a poor substitute for somewhere like Bluewater. I spend a minute staring at Santa's Grotto. It's contact-free this year, apparently. Young children queue up with flushed and pinched faces, their parents mentally ticking another thing off their never-ending list. I wonder what kind of man waits in that little green building covered in tinsel. Is he happy? Has his life turned out how he hoped? Or is he eating mince to disguise his breath? I bet his list is longer than mine. It's decidedly fresh outside as I walk down the arcade past an abundance of closed shops to Party Outfits, which sits near the end. I push the door open and hear a pathetic tinkle. An old guy looks up from a counter at the bottom of a surprisingly long, narrow shop. We share half a wave. I stride to what I want, which is easy to find. They have a large choice of many sizes. They have everything from kids to XXXXL. There's even one that inflates. I select XXL, which must be the minimum to be convincing. 3 laughing teenagers enter, then 2 more. While I'm queuing to pay, the little doorbell rings twice more as other people stride in. It's freezing in the shop, though. Maybe the profit margins are slim on this type of merchandise. "They come up large," says the shopkeeper, without looking at me. "Perfect." He casts a quick eye over my body but doesn't meet my eyes. He shrugs and nods. £25. I freeze behind my scarf for a moment, even though it isn't much money. That's how tight things are. I need a new laptop, but that's wishful thinking. Meat and presents might be slim on the ground this year. There was another argument when we saw the price of a turkey. I don't give a shit what sort of meat it is when it's drowning in salty bisto. I shuffle past the throng in the congested shop while avoiding anyone's gaze. It doesn't look like a place that would install cameras, and I haven't seen any. Outside, it feels as if I am carrying a ticking bomb. But nobody's interested in me. I wander around to Bridge Street and stand outside the next place I need to visit. This shop stayed open through lockdown, saying it was selling essential items. I guess that applies in my case. A large store like this must have CCTV, so I pull my hat down a little lower and my scarf up when I walk in and peruse the range. It's not a simple decision. A couple of them feel amazing, but cost over £50. They might even be too efficient. I select an aluminium one instead that's half price and only £10. That should do the job. It's tricky though. I never was any good at physics. Yet again, the shop assistant barely registers my presence when I hand it over and pay. We really have got customer service off pat in this country. Off pat. That's one of my poor old mother's sayings. I'd love a pricey but tasty burger from the van opposite the town hall. Instead, I trudge home. Passing W.H. Smith, where the post office now is, I allow myself a little smile. They'll have delivered my letter to Peterborough City Radio today, or tomorrow morning at the latest. So tomorrow night is prime time. What I've got to do doesn't feel real. In some ways, it seems evil. But at a certain point, you have to stand up for yourself and your family. There's a line, and we think it's been crossed. Our history drives me to act. Chapter 5. D.I. Barton. D.I. Barton looked at his watch and rose from his chair. It had been a tough case, dealing with 2 abducted children, but at least they'd now been returned to their mother. No visible harm had been done, but there were rules, and Dad had broken them. He'd be enjoying processed and reformed turkey on a plastic plate this Christmas. Only DS Sean, Xander and Barton remained in the office at 7 p.m. "Do you fancy a lift home?" asked Xander. Barton could stroll to Peterborough's Thorpewood police station in less than 30 minutes, so he often did to clear his head or mull cases over. A walk back in the drizzle and dark after a long, stressful day didn't appeal, though. Sure. They went down to the car park and were soon on their way. Instead of taking the turn to Barton's house, Xander continued straight on. Barton was no fool. "Why not say you wanted to talk about something?" "Who said I did?" "Right, where are we going then?" "Oh, McDonald's?" "No." Holly would not be pleased. I'm glad you mentioned her name. She said to remember to ask you and Kelly to come for dinner on Christmas Day. Xander and D.S. Kelly Strange had been close to getting together ever since she'd moved up from London a few years ago, but they'd never quite got over the line. Xander had lost his child to carbon monoxide poisoning not long before Strange had arrived. His relationship had died too, so it hadn't been plain sailing for him. But things had progressed with the resolution of the fire killer case, and now they were dating. Actually, we're going to be at mine. My parents said they'll come over and help with a traditional Christmas to welcome Kelly to the family. Her folks are coming too. The in-laws and the outlaws. Aren't they the same thing? Nope. Outlaws are wanted. Xander tutted. Oh, very good. How long have you had that up your sleeve? I just made it up. Yeah, right. Okay. It was from a cracker last year. Thought so. They arrived at Hampton Shopping Centre and parked near the entrance. I'm getting some flowers, said Xander. Do you want anything? I'm partial to tulips. Oh, unlucky. Wrong season. Xander got out and started walking. Barton caught up. Hang on, I'll come with you. Then you can spit it out. Xander grinned. They wandered in together. When they reached Tesco Extra and the flower section, Barton twigged. No, you aren't. Xander pretended he hadn't heard the comment. Barton pointed at him. Are you going to ask her tonight? No, I'm not. She's cooking for me this evening. I didn't want to arrive empty-handed. Women like flowers. Simples. Barton clicked his fingers. Christmas Day! You're going to ask her on Christmas Day. Xander's eyes darted around before resting on Barton. What do you reckon? Barton considered his answer. I've been married so long that I can't judge if that's cheesy or romantic, daring or desperate, mad or marvellous. Although, seeing as you only got together 5 minutes ago, we can probably throw crazy into the mix. We've known each other for a decent amount of time. It's not the same as dating. I'd hold fire until you've been a couple for 6 months and the gloss has come off. Wait until the arguments have become vicious, personal grooming diminishes, and sex becomes a distant memory. Talking from your own experience? No, just stuff I've overheard. You always said when you met Holly, you knew straight away. Barton smiled. It was over 15 years ago, but he could still remember that feeling of certainty that he'd found someone he could share his life with. Perhaps I'll buy holly flowers too. Xander laughed. Maybe that'll get you some early holly this Christmas, he said, if you get my drift. When they got inside the superstore, Barton was pleased to find a decent selection of reduced items due to it being late in the day. They both chose a bunch and made their way to the till queues. Barton picked up a Mars bar and put that on the conveyor belt with his seasonal bouquet. Barton had been on a continuous diet since he'd hit his teens, but rarely took it seriously. Xander and he were big men, well over 6 feet, but Barton now weighed more than 18 stone. Xander shook his head at the chocolate bar. Barton shrugged. What? It's not my fault if they put all this tempting stuff at the tills. If the government was serious about helping people maintain a healthy weight, they'd ban these antics and force the stores to have the naughty items in a special over-18 section at the rear. Xander laughed. Good idea. They could call it the Isle of Death. Barton chuckled as well. Exactly. If you asked a shop assistant where the microwave cheeseburgers were kept, she'd shake her head and say, "Oh, sir, have you lost the will to live?" Then she'd give you a leaflet with a picture of someone having a triple bypass operation on the front with an 0800 number underneath. Although, This is the UK. So she'd then direct you to the Isle of Death, telling you to find the cheeseburgers between the cream donuts and crystal meth. All of which are buy one, get one free, replied Barton. The two men paid for their wares and returned to the car. When they reached Barton's house, Xander cleared his throat before Barton got out. Well, John, shall I go for it? Yeah. Why not? Be smart, though. Stack the odds in your favour by getting a load of mulled wine down her neck first. He waved Xander off, then realised he'd forgotten to take a key because he hadn't driven his car that morning. He pressed the doorbell. Holly opened the door and stared at the flowers in Barton's hands. Oh, John, what have you done now? Chapter 6. D.I. Barton. Tuesday the 15th of December. The next morning, Barton had a meeting first thing to tie up the abduction case with his boss. Barton left DCI Cox's office afterwards with a wry smile. Despite some unpleasant crimes that year, his team's clear-up rate remained impressive. Cox was so impressed she'd just borrowed one of his sergeants off him, specifically D.S. Strange, and seconded her to the other major crimes team, which she said was because they had more cases. Cox had been promoted above him over 2 years ago. She must have forgotten about the rumour mill that operated in all police force offices. The other team had one sergeant off sick with gallstones, and the other had taken an immediate holiday, despite them being staffed down. Rumour was she'd gone to rehab. She wouldn't be the last. Strange would be going to clear her desk. There were also people off with COVID or who had been in close contact with the infected. Finally, 2 of the other team's DCs had been injured at the same football match, playing, not policing, so it was all hands to the pump. Barton had agreed to be on call this evening due to the lack of sergeants about. Xander and Strange said they were off to IKEA when he'd asked them and, to his surprise, wouldn't be swayed. Seeing as Barton was working all day, he really hoped he wouldn't receive any calls that night. He was acting down, because normally a DS would do it. Usually, Barton would get a DC to act up, but he was one of the few DIs who didn't mind doing it from time to time because his team then knew he was putting in extra like they did. When he called on them for more effort and overtime amid serious cases, he was rarely disappointed. His stomach rumbled. He opened the carrier bag Holly had given him before he left, which contained his lunch. He'd told her not to trouble herself and focus on getting her other jobs done, but she was wise to that, and the contents were healthy and unappealing. His mobile phone rang, and he gladly placed his tub of ham salad down. D.I. Barton speaking. Barton listened to someone sneezing on the other end of the line. Sorry, Julian here. I have a DJ to speak to you, said a quiet young male voice. Pardon? The line went quiet, then someone much louder came on. Tim Tibbles here. I work for PCR, that's Peterborough City Radio, your radio. The radio... Barton cut him off. D.I. Barton. Inspector, great to speak to you. Look, I received a creepy letter, very odd, thought I'd ring. Let you know, just in case. Barton smiled. It was certainly a voice for radio. Before we get to that, where did you get my number? My assistant Julian found it. You came in and did a call out to the public to keep vigilant for a night stalker a few years back. Barton recalled the case, but it must have been 10 years ago. He supposed he did have the same number. Usually, calls would come via HQ and a log would get created. Barton would need to register one if this call turned out to be serious. OK, what kind of letter? Plain white envelope, A4, addressed to me, by name. I do the morning show. Single white piece of paper with a short message. And what might that message be? There are 3 words at the top of the sheet. The Santa Killer. Okay, but it sounds like kids messing around to me. Have you had any other similar messages? No, nothing as weird as this. Any crank calls? Any vandalism? No, not for a long time. We get the odd window broken, but that's par for the course on a shopping parade. No staff have felt uncomfortable in any way? No. Do you have someone who resembles Father Christmas? Any shows discussing the big guy? Nope. We used to have a regular guy come in when I worked at Heart FM, but that was decades ago. OK, I appreciate you taking the time to ring in and tell us about it. Let us know if you receive another one or there's something else worrying. That's it? You aren't going to do anything? No. If we investigated every single message like that, we'd never have time for the serious offences. It's worrying. It's a little worrying. I guess you could argue it comes under the Malicious Communications Act. That's what I thought. Hang on a minute. Barton could hear Tibbles speaking to what he assumed was Julian. He began to wish he were eating his lunch. Julian says that we got a similar letter 3 months ago saying that trouble was coming. Have you still got it? Wait there. Tibbles came back on after half a minute. No. Was it the same writing or style? He can't remember. Look, nobody's actually been threatened. There's no implicit menace to anyone imminently or otherwise, except perhaps the good man himself, and he won't be here for over a week yet. Right. Does that mean there will be more? I suppose it's possible. But in the meantime, just be extra careful. Keep an eye out for strange behaviour. Walk to your cars in pairs, lock the doors, that sort of thing. OK, great ideas. Detective Barton, isn't it? Yes. Should I tell my listeners? No, not at this point. We wouldn't want to scare anyone unnecessarily. As I said, you can always call and ask for me if any more suspicious post arrives. OK, I'll keep it to myself, although the 3 words at the bottom are a concern. Barton ungritted his teeth. Please read the whole letter to me. The Santa Killer coming to town. Chapter 7. Maggie. With their evening exercise class finished, Maggie and Anne-Marie staggered back to the changing room. It had been a brutal workout under the watchful gaze of Lothar. They sat on a bench next to each other and groaned. Think of all the mince pies we've earned, said Maggie. No pies for me until the big day. I'm in the zone. You will not believe how much I weigh now. Maggie watched as Anne-Marie peeled off her damp leggings and T-shirt and posed in her underwear. 13.5. 13 dead. No way! That's amazing! Maggie beamed at her gym buddy. They were becoming closer, and that was a lovely feeling. It had been years since she'd had anything like it. If only they had more free time, she thought. Maybe they could even have a spa weekend together. Maggie smiled ruefully. How the hell was she going to fit any weekends away in? Sometimes life was frustrating. Maggie pushed those thoughts out of her head. It had been a brilliant couple of months for her as well. 3 pounds lighter, and she'd been paid 5 times since she'd received her promotion. The extra £300 in her pay packet was money she hadn't expected. It was giving her a real lift. In fact, if she was honest, It was money she didn't need. James's life insurance had been more than ample, leaving her mortgage-free. Her car had been brand new, and the debt on that got cleared as well. They'd also just had a total kitchen refurb, so apart from holidays, which her mother often insisted on covering, Maggie didn't expect any hefty bills in the near future. The pay for a salesperson had been enough for her to live to a decent standard. This Christmas, therefore, was going to be fabulous. Perhaps she'd buy presents for her neighbours and really treat her mum. "Are you going to the pool and sauna?" asked Anne-Marie. "Of course," replied Maggie. "It's the best bit." They got changed into their swimsuits and had a quick shower. Then, laughing, they linked arms and walked into the pool area. They chatted as they did breaststroke up and down the 25-metre length. "You're in a good mood. Is it all that time with the boss man?" Maggie looked over at her friend. "Don't start that. I've had a lot more contact with him since I got promoted." "Close contact, by the looks of it. He's single, isn't he?" "I would imagine so." "How old do you reckon?" "I doubt he'll be seeing 50 again." "Perhaps that's not a bad thing. He owns the business, has plenty of money, widowed, won't want kids, and he seems nice enough. In fact, he's pretty handsome for an older dude." "No, that's true, but it's a bit icky, with him being the owner. He asked me if I wanted to go for a drink after work to celebrate my figures." "Are you sure figures was plural?" "No, I'm not. He kept that quiet." "Yeah, I know. He's kind of overbearing, but I think he's lonely." "He isn't my type anyway. I want someone who wants to keep fit." Anne-Marie gave her a huge grin. "Stop it," Maggie giggled. "Did Ken ask you out before the promotion?" "Yes. Why?" "I'm just curious." "What did you say to put him off?" "That I was busy with Pippa." "It felt like he'd crossed the line, but at least he was polite." "Yes, I suppose it is a little dodgy with him being your boss, but loads of people meet their partners at work. Or maybe at the gym." Maggie laughed and swallowed some water. "That's enough," she said after, standing and spluttering. "Oh, I'll drown." "He looked buff tonight, though. He must get well paid because I'm sure he has new gear each week." They set off swimming again. "OK, no more Lothario jokes." "How is Pippa? You mentioned she started talking more." Maggie smiled and got another mouthful of chlorinated water. "Yes, Pippa's coming on leaps and bounds. I thought she was really behind on her schooling, but it's almost as though she's been quietly picking things up while she wasn't speaking. Her vocabulary is limited, but we did some maths the other day and she surprised me. Her drawing is, at least, where she's expected to be. The only concern we have is reading. But there's nearly 2 years until secondary school, so it's still possible she can go to the local academy. I just want her to have the same opportunities as other children, Anne-Marie wasn't listening. She gestured her head to the person walking from the male changing room. Maggie glanced over to see Lothar whipping his towel away, then hanging it on a hook next to the showers. He did 2 swift touches of his toes, then strode around the pool with the grace of a big cat. Maggie got a final gobful of water as she ducked herself under to stop him from catching her laughing at his tiny speedos. The women quickly flagged after the tiring class beforehand and clung to the side of the pool. They watched Lothar swim up and down, cutting through the water with powerful strokes. "Sauna?" asked Anne-Marie. "Yes, not long though. Pippa's still waiting for me to get home before she allows herself to drop off, and she had an unsettled sleep last night." Maggie felt the waves from someone swimming up behind her. "Hi, ladies. Can I ask you a question?" Lothar's English was almost perfect. "Of course," said Anne-Marie with a big grin. I'm interested in updating the kitchen for my place. I hear you work for a designer and fitter. Yes, we do, said Maggie. There's a showroom at Manchester Square. Ken's Kitchens and Bathrooms. You can just pop in. Very good, Maggie. Will I see you there? Yes, I don't do Mondays or Saturdays, though. Great. I look forward to it. We could have coffee. Maggie's face reddened. I'll chat to you when you come in. Fine. Good session tonight. You both make wonderful progress. Maggie smiled as Lothar swiftly pulled himself out of the water and strutted to fetch his towel. Muscles rippled on his back as his arms swung by his side. I'll chat to you when you come in, mimicked Anne-Marie. I don't do Mondays or Saturdays. Are we having that sauna or not? Asked Maggie, trying to look stern. Oh, I'm not sure we need to. It's rather steamy out here. Chapter 8. The Santa Killer. I feel pretty conspicuous cycling through the streets dressed like this. The huge black wind cheater is so big it keeps catching between the spokes. Luckily, it's a dark night. I meet only one other person by the rowing lake. He nearly gets run over because there aren't many lights. He doesn't have a dog, so God only knows what he's doing here. I cycle through Orton Staunch where the lock is. It's pitch black and empty. The heavy cloud cover has kept it mild, so I'm sweating like hell. This is the part where I might get seen, so I need to keep my head down and be quick. I race onto Oundle Road, where the traffic is light. Commuter hour is long gone. This is the risky part. She's usually back before 9:30, but I need a bit of time to get ready. I've cycled because the plan is to pretend I'm working on a puncture. There are very few cars about when I reach the end of her road. I stumble off the bike, cursing that I wore black wellies, and lean it against the bench. Wellies would be rubbish if I had to run. I'd fear for my chances if anyone fit chased me. Like her mother. It's 9:15 and a steady drizzle falls. My resolve weakens while I bend over the bike and fiddle, but there's still a core of anger when I spot her Q5. She's cautious in the slippery conditions, and I tense when her headlights light me up for agonizing seconds as she turns. It's decision time. I don't want to do it, but I think I have to. The guilt when it arrives will be hard to bear, but what will my partner say if I fail to go through with it? Where will our lives end up without something changing? I slide the weapon from my rucksack. Its solid nature gives me reassurance. I stare at Maggie's house. She's parked next to her mother's vehicle, and the garage door is rising. It's the usual routine. She stops on the drive so she can look up to her daughter's bedroom. Pippa stands at the window. The garage door grumbles to a stop. Her daughter doesn't respond when Maggie waves out of the car window. After edging into the garage, she leaves the car. She returns to the driveway and gets no response from another wave. Maggie raises her left arm and presses the fob to close the garage door. I haul off my raincoat and drop it behind the sign that says St. Catherine's Lane. I pass the first few houses on the road as I walk towards her. Their lights are out. Maggie is only 50 metres away when, for the first time since I've been watching, Pippa places her hands on the glass. She's seen me. Her eyes are on me. Good. Let her watch. I pull the hat out of my pocket, put it on, and stretch out my shoulders. 20 metres now. It's too late to worry about technique. I have to go for broke. The garage door clunks into place, leaving a heavy silence. Maggie walks towards her front door. She looks at the keys in her left hand. She freezes. I must appear in her peripheral vision because her head turns in my direction, but I'm already swinging. I'm so close that she doesn't even flinch. The sound isn't what I expect. It's loud and hollow. The impact jars my arm. She slumps to her knees, but to my amazement, she twists to grab the door handle. I swing and strike the door instead, then manage to hit her again. She drops to the floor and rolls onto her side. For a moment, I think she's going to see me and scream, but her eyelids droop. Blood trickles past her ear, along her face, and pools in the hollow of her neck. Her hand reaches up in a token attempt at defence. I strike it down. Chapter 9. D.I. Barton. Barton felt his eyelids drooping as he watched the television. He glanced over at Holly as she arranged baubles on the tree in the corner of the lounge. She was a small woman and could pass for a child with her back to him. As for their children, their eldest son, Lawrence, hadn't returned from university yet, despite term finishing. Barton suspected he had a girlfriend. Luke and Layla had been keen on decorating the tree for less than 5 minutes. Teenager Layla was now texting while sprawled on an armchair. Luke lay on the floor stroking their greyhound. Barton could see the white part of the dog's eyes. Gizmo hadn't yet worked out what species the 7-year-old was. "Dad, what exactly is a divorce?" asked Luke. "What makes you ask that?" "Colin in my class said his parents are having one." "I see. How does Colin feel about it?" "He's sad. He might need to go to a different school." "Well, divorces can be tough on children." "Are you and Mummy going to get divorced?" Barton's gaze moved to Holly. "That's okay, John. I'll answer that." She came and sat beside Luke and placed her arms around him, staring lovingly into his eyes. "I couldn't divorce your dad, because it wouldn't be fair to whoever got him next. It'd be like having your dog adopted by another family because you knew it was getting lazy and windy and was a bit past its best." Holly and Luke both turned to him and grinned. "Come on, Luke, put your pyjamas on and brush your teeth," said Barton, standing. "Dad, it's early." "It's gone 9. Barton looked over at Holly. "Dog or kid?" Luke replied before she did. "I want Mum to put me to bed. You never read to me." Luke and Holly scowled at him as he and Gizmo left the room. Barton opened the front door and saw the drizzle. Gizmo had turned into a wonderful family dog over the last few months since they'd adopted him. He wasn't a year old yet, but he'd proven placid, friendly, funny, and quick to house train. The only problem was he was rather selective about where he went for his nighttime business. Barton might be outside for half an hour. His mobile rang 8 minutes later, while he was still waiting. It was Control. "D.I. Barton speaking." "Good evening, sir. I understand you're on call tonight?" "That's right." "There's been a suspected violent incident at number 5 St. Catherine's Lane." "Only a suspected violent incident?" "It's unconfirmed because the details are sketchy. The 999 caller was the mother of the injured party. She found her daughter with her head and face covered in blood at the front door and rang it in." Barton's brain fired into action. "Sounds fairly violent to me." "It might have been an accident at this point. No one was seen leaving the scene and, according to the mother, the victim had only just driven home." "Oh, fair enough. What's the current situation?" "The incident was called in 1/4 of an hour ago. Luckily, we could divert an ambulance that was 2 streets away, driving to someone who'd had a fall. The paramedics had seen similar head wounds and noted they looked suspicious. They blue-lighted the victim immediately and rang us en route." Questions raced to Barton's mouth, but they weren't urgent. The first priority for the police at the scene was protection of life. If it was an attack or a mugging, The person responsible might still be looking for victims. Do we have uniform present? That's a negative. Multiple RTC on Boongate. Various other incidents over the city. You know how it is. One of those nights. Barton grimaced. Times were tough all over. People isolating from the virus exacerbated the normal stretching of the thin blue line at this time of the year. Anyone vulnerable still at the address? Also a negative. Paramedic spoke to the mother and asked her to follow in her own car with the only child present if she felt able. The house is empty. Barton couldn't help asking, and the person with the fall from the other call? We sent the last resource we had available, which was a special constable who should have finished an hour ago. Excellent work. St. Catherine's Lane is 4 minutes from me. I'll attend, then continue to the hospital. When I have more, I'll be in touch. Barton looked down at Gizmo, who immediately squatted. Barton put his hand in his pocket and gave him a treat. Chapter 10. The Santa Killer. As I cycle home, a fire burns inside for the thing I've done. In the dark, I stop and put my big raincoat back over my red outfit. The guttural, choking laugh that comes from me is not mine. The leer that distorts my face isn't me. I try to force it into a smile. Even though family comes first, not everyone can step up. Maybe this year will end better now. I think of the best Christmas I can remember, which would have been when I was around 7. The memories are full of the usual things that remain so familiar, the lights, the tree with too many decorations on, most of which were home or school made. There were parcels underneath addressed to my parents. I remember Mum telling me that adults have to buy presents for each other, but Santa brings the children theirs. There was a Disney film, Fantasia, on the TV. I recall the film because I had no idea what was going on with it. But I never said anything because I didn't want to risk them looking at the clock and realising the time. My parents were drinking something strange-smelling and giggling, so I assumed they understood the movie. I can even remember being too hot between them. The radiator behind always heated the back of the sofa, and the fire was baking me from the front. It was just the 3 of us. No one else interrupting. Nothing else mattered. As my parents laughed some more, I put up with my clothes feeling sweaty. I hoped we'd never move. Times like that don't last, though. I've learned the hard way. But I believe I even knew back then to enjoy the moment. My mum broke the spell by getting up. She chuckled and ruffled my hair. "Have you been good this year?" she asked. "Very," I replied. I can remember her laughing so much she wobbled. My dad got up and wiped his eyes. "We love you, son. You're our favourite." Well, perhaps I made that last line up, but the rest was true. I'm sure of it. I prayed as I turned the TV over to find a cartoon I understood, that every year would have this magic. It wasn't my first memory, though. Most people's earliest recollection is usually something unpleasant. Mine was too. Chapter 11. The Santa Killer. Age 5. I lean backwards at the entrance to the playground. Every part of me, even my ears, is tensed. I will not go inside. "Come on," says my dad. "You like school." "No, I should stay at home." "I know, but your mum isn't well." "I'll cuddle her." He doesn't reply, so I turn and glance up to see if he's weakening. His face is red with embarrassment, though. He apologises to the queue of people behind him who we're stopping getting past. I don't care. I'm still not moving. My dad picks me up and marches towards our class's entrance. I try to do my plank, but he tucks me under his arm, so I kick and buck. I'm dropped onto my feet at the door to reception. He crouches down to me. You know, everyone has to go to school. I'm sick too, Daddy. I am, really. I've got work to do and your mum's poorly in bed. I'll be back to collect you at home time. He leans forward and kisses me on the forehead. I stand on my tiptoes and scream in his face, "Won't!" A large figure appears next to us. It's okay. I'll take over from here. You get going. It's Mrs. Graham, who's usually very nice. She grabs my hand so I tense, ready to pull back. Instead of pulling me along, she puts her other hand under my armpit and lifts me off the floor as well. My shoes scrape the threshold as she drags me into the classroom and closes the door behind me. I'm so shocked, I let her hustle me inside, remove my favourite red coat and guide me to my table. Nasty Tilly is sitting there already. She waits for the teacher to leave, then reaches over and pinches me on the arm. I'm too cross for it to hurt. I want to hurt her in return, though, but I'm not sure how. Instead, I quietly seethe. We're sent out to the garden later in the morning to play with the sand and water. Tilly stands in front of me, eyes narrowed so much that they're almost shut. I drop my gaze to avoid a fight. Her pink leggings have a big hole in the knee. My eyes rest on her scuffed and battered sandals. She stomps away, and I release a sigh of relief. A bit later, I focus on my sandcastle. It's a good one. Best ever, in fact. I gently place a shell on the top of it. Then a shoe stamps down and flattens it. When I peer up, a cup of freezing cold water is thrown into my face. I gasp. Tilly titters. When I clear my vision, I glance around to wait for her to be told off. Nobody comes. No one's interested. I look down at where my sandcastle was and sniff back the tears. After rooting through the ruins, I find my shell and pocket it. Tilly has returned to the other side of the garden and crouches with her back facing me. I kneel in the sandpit and seethe some more. After a while, I regain control of my breathing and check who's near me. The teachers are inside talking to each other. Light laughter reaches me through the folding doors. I haul myself to my feet and trudge over to a washing-up bowl, which is half full of water. I pick it up and stomp towards Tilly. It's heavy. The water begins to move back and forth as I stagger. Waves slosh over the edges of the bowl. My socks are soaked. When I reach Tilly, I pause behind her. Ever so slowly and carefully, I upend the container. Her head sinks beneath her shoulders, as if that will somehow escape the drenching. Then she screams. Tilly pushes herself up and turns with a face twisted with rage. I ram the bowl straight into her nose, knocking her backwards. She plonks onto her bum, then I bash her on the head with a fist. For the third time that morning, I'm lifted off the ground. There are angry words hollered at me from a stern face as I'm carried past, but I don't listen. A younger assistant holds my hand outside as we wait for my father to turn up. At least I get to go home. I look up at her, the sun half blinding me, but I can see she's smiling. Tilly won't be mean to you again, she says. At my confused look, she crouches and whispers in my ear. You did the right thing. My dad stamps through the gate towards us in his work uniform. I usually hate upsetting him. He's my hero, although I'm distracted by the kind lady's comments. My dad stops in front of me and glares down. His grimace reflects his anger, whereas my expression would be described as thoughtful. Even though I'm young, a lesson has been learned. Chapter 12. D.I. Barton. 2 minutes after Gizmo had done his business, he was inside the house. Holly had heard and Barton was on his way. He pulled off the drive in his blue Land Rover, drove down Orton Longville Village Road for a minute, tutted at the lights for 30 seconds, turned right, went over 2 mini roundabouts, took a left, and he was there. The joys of local policing. Barton already knew this was a nice place to live, with big properties generously spread out. He parked on the curb of number 5. It didn't look like a crime scene. He got out of his 4x4 and had a quick check around for a neighbourhood watch sign. No joy. There only seemed to be 2 houses that would have a decent view of number 5's front door. Both looked deserted. Barton checked to make sure they didn't have doorbell CCTV. Barton could get one of his team out to help, but if the people involved were safe tonight, he would get more use out of his people if he kept them for tomorrow. He guessed it could be a doorstep mugging, which sadly happened from time to time in the areas with expensive housing. You were at your most vulnerable as you held your shopping in one hand and opened the door with the other, your mind on the warmth and safety inside as opposed to the danger behind. Barton had recognised the voice from Control. It was a woman who'd been doing the job for a long time. When he'd first become a sergeant, he'd wasted time telling capable people how to do their jobs. With experience, he realised that unless they were new starters, they did what was necessary. The paramedics tonight, for example, had saved a lot of manpower by encouraging the mother and grandchild to go to the hospital. They would have known the services were stretched. Their training preserved lives in more ways than the obvious. Barton also knew that sometimes he forgot all this and asked his detectives to do things they would automatically do. Xander, in particular, had more investigative experience than he did, and the youngsters were often more clued up with the technology side of things. Barton focused on the task at hand. If this was a mugging, or something personal, it was likely that the attacker would be finished for the night. It was rare, although not unheard of, for anyone to commit more than one attack. Unless, of course, it could be someone desperate for drugs, and they might not have taken enough for what they needed. When he reached the front door, the security light above the garage lit up, quickly revealing to Barton that the unusual pattern on the cream door was a smear of blood. It was raining harder now. By the morning, the block paving wasn't likely to give up many secrets. He scanned the ground and the grass to check for anything out of the ordinary, but came up empty-handed. He returned to the boot of his vehicle, grabbed 5 cones and a roll of police tape. After checking the door was locked, he made a small cordon outside it, then got back in his car with a rueful smile. There was nothing like keeping your eye in, but he seemed to be doing a lot of it lately. Xander reckoned Barton was the only DI in the country with cones in his boot, but Barton had used them regularly, once when his car had broken down on a motorway. He wasn't protecting the scene for evidential purposes, though, because there was nobody to stay with the scene all night. They wouldn't be able to show a court continuity with any item discovered, but it would let people know of the police's interest, which should keep them away from the property and keep the neighbours alert.